There is a photograph taken somewhere in the Cascade Mountains of the Pacific Northwest on the morning of September 14th, 2003. 6 people stand together at a trailhead, backpacks on, smiling. One of them is shielding their eyes from the sun. Another is mid-laugh at something just out of frame. They look like people who came back. They never did. And 11 years after that photograph was taken, a letter arrived in a mailbox in Bend, Oregon, postmarked, stamped, addressed in handwriting that a forensic document examiner would later confirm belonged to one of the 6 people standing in that image. The letter was dated 3 weeks after the date they disappeared. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The Cascades in early September carry a particular kind of quiet. The summer crowds have thinned. The air is sharp in a way that feels clean rather than cold. The trails are dry, well-marked, and the kind of beautiful that makes people feel safe in ways they sometimes shouldn't. It is not a hostile landscape in any traditional sense. Rangers patrol it. The trails are documented. Cell coverage fades in the deep passes, but that's expected, and experienced hikers know this and plan around it. People go into those mountains every single week during that time of year, and they come back out. That's the part that matters. They almost always come back out. The 6 people who went in on September 14th had every reason to believe they would too. Their names, for the purposes of this account, were Thomas, Carol, Reese, Dana, Martin, and June. They ranged in age from 27 to 41. They were not strangers. Thomas and Carol were married. Reese and Dana had been college friends for over a decade. Martin was Thomas's younger brother, and June was a woman Carol had met through a hiking club 2 years earlier. They had done group trips before, not as a complete group, but in various combinations. Thomas and Martin had done the enchantments. Dana and Carol had completed a 3-day loop in Olympic National Park the previous summer. These were not novices pretending to be experienced. These were people who owned good gear, read trail reports, told their families where they were going and when they expected to be back. They planned a 5-day route. They registered at the trailhead. They had a planned exit point, a designated check-in date, and at least 2 people outside the group who knew the full itinerary. That's what makes this different from the cases where people vanish because they were careless. This group was careful, and careful people, when they disappear, leave a specific kind of silence, the kind where every absence has to be explained. On the morning of September 14th, a ranger at the trailhead station spoke briefly with the group. He would later describe them as cheerful, organized, and prepared. He checked their permit. He noted their planned exit date. He watched them walk up the trail and turn a bend in the path and disappear into the trees. That interaction, that small and routine exchange, will become the last confirmed account of all 6 people alive and together. The next 5 days passed the way they were supposed to. No one expected contact. No one was worried. September 19th was a check-in date, the day they were expected to call or appear at the exit trailhead. Carol's sister was the designated contact. She waited through the morning, then the afternoon, then called a ranger station just before 5 in the evening. She was calm when she called. She said they were probably just running a little late. She'd give it another few hours. The ranger on the phone agreed that was reasonable. Late returns happen all the time. By 9 that night, she called again. By the following morning, a search had been organized. What followed was one of the largest wilderness searches in that part of the Cascades in over a decade. 43 search and rescue personnel, 2 helicopters, tracking dogs, a coordinated grid search that covered the entirety of their registered route. It lasted 8 days. Searchers walked every documented section of the trail. They checked campsites, stream crossings, ridgeline exposures, the kind of terrain where falls were most likely. They found nothing. Not a tent, not a boot print in the right place, not a discarded wrapper or a piece of rope or a single item that could be confirmed as belonging to any of the 6 hikers. That absence is the first thing that should stop you. When people get lost in the wilderness, they leave things behind. Even when the outcome is the worst possible outcome, there's almost always physical evidence. A campsite, personal effects, some trace of where they stopped. The mountains are large, but the trail system they registered on is not. The route they filed covered approximately 42 miles over 5 days. Searchers walked it. They walked the deviations. They searched above and below the trail line, and the only thing they found, the only confirmed item, was a single water bottle sitting on a flat rock about 8 miles in, which a search coordinator noted in his report could have belonged to anyone passing through at any time. The investigation that followed the search was handled by the county sheriff's office with assistance from the National Park Service. Their initial position, stated publicly within 2 weeks of the search's conclusion, was that the group had likely experienced some form of navigational failure, that they had gone off-trail, become disoriented, and that the terrain's complexity had prevented searchers from reaching them in time. It was presented as a tragic but not implausible explanation. Mountains swallow people. It happens. The wilderness is not a controlled environment. At first, that explanation held. Families grieved. A small memorial was held. The case remained open technically, but the practical reality was that without remains or evidence, there was nowhere for it to go. And then, 2 things happened, not at the same time, not dramatically. Quietly, over the course of the following year, 2 things emerged that didn't fit. The first was a statement from a couple who had been hiking the same general area on September 16th. 2 days into the group's trip, 3 days before they were due out, the couple, both experienced hikers, reported passing a campsite at a location that should have been along Thomas's group's route. The campsite was occupied. There were 2 tents set up, a camp stove, and what appeared to be several people resting. The couple didn't stop to talk. They were making time toward their own exit, but the woman later recalled that one of the people at the campsite raised a hand in a wave as they passed. She waved back. She thought nothing of it at the time. When she heard about the disappearance several weeks later, she contacted the ranger station. Her account was taken. It was filed. It placed what appeared to be at least some members of the group alive, camping, at a location consistent with their planned route on September 16th. That was a significant detail. It meant the group had not vanished at the trailhead, not within the first day, not in some early catastrophic event. It placed them days into their trip, apparently fine. The search coordinator reviewed her account. He noted it in a supplemental report. And then, and this is where the record becomes difficult to follow, that supplemental report appears in the file index but not in the file itself. The pages referenced in the index are missing. When a family attorney requested the full investigative file 18 months after the disappearance, the file arrived with that section absent. The ranger station, when contacted, said there may have been a filing error. A second request produced the same incomplete file. The couple who had reported the sighting was not re-interviewed. When the woman attempted to follow up with investigators on her own, she was told the case had been reviewed and that no new investigative steps were being taken at that time. At this point, investigators were left with 2 possibilities. Which one would you have believed? The second detail that emerged in that first year was smaller, and in some ways more unsettling precisely because of how small it was. Martin's employer, he had worked for an engineering firm in Portland, received a voicemail on September 22nd. That was 3 days after the group was due out, 1 day after the search had officially started. The voicemail was garbled. The quality was poor, but the IT department retrieved and enhanced it. It lasted 4 seconds. There was breathing, and then a single word of the audio technician who reviewed it described as sounding like either a name or a place name, something short, possibly 1 syllable, possibly 2. The technician could not confirm what the word was. The voicemail came from an unregistered number that traced to a prepaid phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in a small town about 60 miles from Trailhead. Martin had no known connection to that town. No one in the group did. The prepaid phone was never found. The voicemail was logged as inconclusive. The case moved no further. When the families pushed, and they did push persistently, through attorneys and public records requests and direct appeals to the county, the responses they received were consistent in their vagueness. The investigation was ongoing. Resources were limited. The terrain made physical recovery unlikely. Officials expressed sympathy. They did not express urgency. There is a particular quality to institutional silence when an institution has decided it is done with something, and that quality settled over this case by the end of the first year. And then nothing happened for 9 years. No new searches. No formal reopening. The families maintained their own quiet efforts, an informal network, a website, occasional media inquiries that generated brief local coverage and then disappeared. Thomas and Martin's parents held on to the hope that is particular to families in these situations. Not optimism exactly, but an inability to accept a finality that has never been formally delivered. It was Carol's sister, the same woman who had made those calls on the evening of September 19th, who received a letter. She has described the moment she found it in her mailbox in Bend, Oregon, as one of the most disorienting experiences of her life. Not because she immediately knew what it was, but because she almost didn't open it. It looked ordinary. A plain envelope, standard size, first-class stamp. Her name, an address written by hand. No return address. She almost set aside for later. She opened it standing at the mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. The handwriting on it was Carol's. She knew it immediately. She and Carol had exchanged letters during Carol's first years away from home, actual handwritten letters, something they had done as a ritual since childhood. She knew the way Carol formed her lowercase letters, the particular way she crossed her sevens, the slight leftward lean that was just Carol's. She stood at the mailbox and read the letter, and then she sat down on the curb because her legs stopped working the way they were supposed to. The letter did not explain where Carol was. It did not describe what had happened on the mountain. It referenced, in passing, the others, a phrase that implied awareness of the group. It expressed that Carol was safe, that she could not explain everything, and that she hoped the people she loved were not suffering on her account. It asked her sister not to show the letter to law enforcement. There was one line near the bottom that Carol's sister has never repeated publicly. She has said only that the line was specific enough that she is certain no one else could have written it, that it referenced something private between them that no investigator or stranger would have known. The letter was postmarked 11 years after the disappearance. The postmark placed its origin in a small city in the American Southwest. It was not a city anyone in the group had ever lived in or had known connections to. When she eventually did take it to investigators, she waited 6 weeks. The forensic document examiner's conclusion was careful but clear. The handwriting was consistent with samples from Carol. Consistent, not confirmed by some legally binding standard, but consistent. The paper was standard. The ink was standard. There was nothing physically remarkable about any of it. It looked like a letter someone had sat down and written and mailed, and that had traveled through the ordinary postal system, and arrived in an ordinary mailbox in Bend, Oregon. A forensic examiner cannot tell you what a letter means. They can only tell you what it is. What it is, in this case, is a document in handwriting consistent with a woman who disappeared 11 years before it was sent, postmarked from a city she had no known connection to, containing information that her sister says only Carol could have known. The investigation was technically reopened. That reopening lasted 4 months. Investigators traveled to the postmarked city. They interviewed postal workers. They reviewed surveillance footage from the relevant post office during the window when the letter would have been sent. The footage from that specific period was unavailable. The system had been on a rolling 30-day overwrite cycle, and by the time investigators made the request, the relevant dates were gone. They found no trace of Carol in that city. No rental records, no employment records, no sightings they could confirm. The city has a population of roughly 200,000 people. Someone could live quietly in a city that size. Someone could move through it briefly. Someone could mail a letter and be gone before anyone started looking. The investigation closed again. What do you do with that? Seriously, set aside every instinct you have toward resolution and ask yourself what you do with information like that. You have 6 people who vanished without a physical trace. You have a witness account of at least some of them alive days into their trip, documented in a file that then went missing. You have a voicemail from a prepaid phone in a town no one in the group knew. And you have a letter 11 years later in handwriting that an expert says looks like Carol, containing private information, asking for silence. Those facts don't fit together into a clean story. And that might be the most important thing to sit with. There are people, some of them close to the families involved, who have settled on the theory that the disappearance was deliberate, that one or more members of the group planned to vanish, used the hiking trip as cover, and have been living under different identities since. This theory accounts for the absence of physical evidence. It accounts for the letter. It accounts for the fact that 6 people with gear and experience don't simply evaporate from a well-traveled trail system without leaving a single trace. It also requires believing that Thomas and Carol's marriage, that recent Dana's decade of friendship, that the entire fabric of these 6 people's lives was either cover or collateral. It requires that the people left behind, parents, siblings, friends, were lied in a way that has sustained itself for over 2 decades. It requires that no one in that group, across all the years since, made a mistake serious enough to confirm their existence. People do disappear on purpose. It happens more than most of us want to acknowledge. Adults walk away from their lives for reasons that range from desperate to calculated. Identity fraud is more achievable than most people assume. And 6 people who plan carefully enough to vanish from a wilderness trail without leaving evidence, that's not impossible. It would require coordination, preparation, and a shared commitment to silence that most people couldn't maintain. But it's not impossible. The other possibility is harder to name precisely because it involves forces that most people prefer to believe don't operate in ordinary American landscapes. The missing file section, the unreachable witnesses, the voicemail from a town no one knew, the surveillance footage that wasn't there when it needed to be. These details, taken individually, each have mundane explanations. Files get misfiled. Surveillance systems have their limitations. Prepaid phones are purchased for all kinds of reasons. But taken together, they form a pattern that asks a question no one has officially answered. Was the investigation into this disappearance as complete as it was reported to be? That's not an accusation. It's a question. And there's a difference, though the difference often gets collapsed in cases like this. What we know, confirmed and documented, 6 people registered at a trailhead on September 14, 2003. A ranger saw them enter the trail. A search found no physical evidence of their fate. A witness placed at least some of them alive days into the trip. A file section documenting that sighting is missing from the official record. A voicemail was received from a prepaid phone purchased in a town they had no connection to. 11 years later, a letter arrived in handwriting consistent with one of the missing, containing private information, postmarked from a city they had no known ties to. The investigation that followed could not confirm the letter's origin or locate the writer. What we don't know, where they went after September 16th, whether the 6 of them are together or apart, whether Carol wrote that letter under her own will with full freedom or under circumstances we cannot see from here, whether the missing file section was an accident or something else, why the investigation closed as quickly as it did, both times. Carol's sister has said, in the years since the letter arrived, that she has made her peace with not knowing, or something close to peace. She believes Carol's alive. She says this not as hope, but as something she's decided, the way you decide things when the alternative is unbearable. She keeps the letter. She has never published the private line at the bottom of it, and she says she never will. It belongs to her and to Carol. Whatever the rest of this story is, that part is theirs. The other families sit in different places. Thomas and Martin's mother, now in her late 70s, has never accepted any version of events that involves her sons choosing to disappear. She has said publicly that she believes something happened to them on that mountain and that the investigation failed them. She has kept the website running. She answers emails from strangers who have theories. She has read every one. What strikes you, spending time with this case, is not the drama of it. It's the ordinary texture of everything around the mystery. The trailhead is still there. People hike that route every summer. The ranger station still operates. The town near the prepaid phone purchase is still a town. Carol's sister still lives in Bend. The mailbox is still at the end of her driveway. And somewhere in a city in the American Southwest, or somewhere else entirely, or nowhere that the living can reach, there may or may not be a woman named Carol who sat down with a piece of paper and a pen and decided to write one letter to one person, and then went back to whatever life she had made for herself. Or there isn't, and something else entirely is true. The mountains don't give explanations. They're not built for that. They absorb what happens within them and keep going. Season after season, trail after trail. People walk in, people walk out. And very occasionally, someone doesn't, and the rest of us are left to make meaning out of an absence that resists every shape we try to press it into. There is no comfortable place to put this case. Not for the families. Not for the investigators who worked it. Not for Carol's sister, who has read that letter so many times she could probably recite it, and who still doesn't know what it means. If Carol wrote that letter freely, from safety, then something extraordinary happened in those mountains. A choice so complete and so sustained that it is held for over 2 decades. If she didn't write it freely, or if she didn't write it at all, then the questions that follow are ones that nobody in an official capacity has been willing to ask out loud. Cases like this don't disappear. They just fade when people stop asking questions. Carol's sister hasn't stopped. Thomas and Martin's mother hasn't stopped. And now you know this story too, which means the circle of people who are paying attention has grown by however many of you are watching this right now. If something in this case connects to something you know, a place, a detail, a name that feels familiar, there is still a contact form on the family's website. It's still checked. They're still there. Whatever the truth turns out to be, the people who love these 6 individuals have decided that it matters enough to keep the light on. That's the least the rest of us can do. Know that the light is there. What do you think happened? Now what you can prove, what do you think? Leave it in the comments. Some of the most useful threads in cases like this have started exactly that way, with someone who didn't think their thought was important enough to share and then shared it anyway. The photograph from the trailhead is still on the family website. 6 people at the start of a trail, backpacks on, the mountains behind them. One of them, maybe somewhere in the American Southwest, or somewhere else, or nowhere. The mountains are still there. The trail is still open. And the letter is in a drawer in a house in Bend, Oregon, where it has been sitting for more than a decade, holding whatever it knows.